Hi, and welcome to Partners in Progress, a couples podcast about love, life, and well-being in your 20s with me, Eloise.
And me, Sammy.
In this podcast, we'll be discussing topics like relationships, health, well-being, spirituality, and just life. From tips and tricks to failures and falls, all while sharing our story as we try to figure out building and growing a life together in the chaos of modern-day society. We'll be coming to you every Sunday with our shares and invite some guests to share their experiences too. So grab a blanket, a cuppa, and settle in to Partners in Progress. Hello and welcome back to the Partners in Progress podcast. So we are going to be talking about today, kicking off from our last episode where we kind of introduced ourselves and the beginning of our relationship. And this week we're going to be discussing our time being long distance during the first of the lockdowns to literally sharing one bedroom together with no escape. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Sammy, to talk a bit about that journey as the storyteller.
I can continue my storytelling duties from last time. So to pick up where we left off, because I feel like that's the easiest place to kind of go from, we met on sort of the 12th of March, and then we had that amazing night together on the 17th of March, right before the first lockdowns were beginning in the UK. And on the morning of the 18th, so the night or the morning straight after, I was picked up by my parents from my university accommodation and then brought straight back home to Essex from Nottingham. And then I think you were picked up a few days later and then taken back to Milton Keynes.
Yeah, I think it would have been like 2 days after. I was the last of my housemates to realise, I better go home. It started off the week so good, being like, yeah, we'll quarantine together. It'll be great fun. To gradually, literally, course across like 2 days, all of them were like, I'm going home. So I followed suit. Really, a bit dramatic, but there we go.
Yes, so after all that drama had kind of settled and we were both back home, I think that really began the first kind of period of our relationship, really, which was that long distance, which kind of went from that March of 2020 pretty much all the way through to January 2021, with a few kind of meetups and living together a little bit here and there in between.
Yeah, I think what's helpful to say about this as well is the fact that when we talk about long distance, we weren't technically massively far from one another. Sammy, you were in Essex and I was in Milton Keynes, so we were obviously in the same time zone, but it was a very unique circumstance in terms of it being a lockdown, so it was a big no, you cannot see each other, and it was only when the kind of restrictions eased at certain times that we were able to see each other, which we'll talk a bit about. So when we're kind of talking about how we coped, how we, found our experiences, and if there's any kind of tips or anything that we think is good to know if you are going into a similar situation, I think it's important to know that that was the situation. We were in the same country at least.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point to mention that, really, because luckily we didn't have any time zone issues or anything like that. It's more just about we might as well have been on opposite ends of a country, just with the way that the lockdowns worked, as you really couldn't even go that far, even though, yeah, like you say, Essex to Milton Keynes is a fairly short distance in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, so I think what we're saying is we were long distance for how many months then?
9 months, I think, but we kind of lived together for about 2 months of that, again, on and off around lockdowns and anything else. So probably about 7 months total of our relationship was long distance.
Yeah, but what was quite interesting about when we were long distance is it was so extreme. And I think that's the thing that's been the case. It's just circumstantially happened in our relationship is we had that crazy night together and then we literally went straight into kind of being apart, and that was when we created the foundations of our relationship was apart. And I genuinely think that if we hadn't had that night where we literally, even though we didn't know at the time, we did literally talk about everything important, everything that we needed to talk about to see, is this relationship going to work in the long term, so that when we entered the lockdown we knew enough about each other that we were worth fighting for, even though we had literally known each other a week.
Yeah, I think having that moment and that realization of that night of, oh, this is definitely a person that I want to spend the rest of my life with and get to know, and the soulmate in that sense really made all the following steps, I feel like, easy is the wrong word, but having more confidence in taking them, just because there was someone that I felt had such a strong connection with from the word go, rather than like, obviously we built upon that a lot over that time, but the foundations are really strong despite how short of a time it was that we'd known each other before, just kind of being thrown into this very weird version of long distance, I think.
Yeah, I do think, and I think that's a kind of key. I mean, obviously, anyone will tell you that communication is a key thing to have in a relationship. You know, you can't have a healthy, successful relationship without being able to communicate. And it was almost like we threw months of like, you know, first dates kind of thing into that night. We spoke about everything, like all the uncomfortable topics as well. You know, we were talking about like what we wanted from the future and from lives and our opinions and viewpoints, all of the key information, and you know, things that you know, if there were already red flags, they were going to come up that night, let's be honest.
Yeah.
So I do think that is so important when you, especially if there is any time period when there's like long distance involved in a relationship, is, I do think, kind of looking back at it, it may have been beneficial to us to talk about how we could cope, how we could prepare in advance for long distance, which I know we would do now, but because it was kind of unexpected, we obviously didn't have that conversation. But I do think that's something that would be helpful for like other people to do if they were kind of faced with a similar decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I think again in our case it was always thrown around as just being 2 weeks. So it was a thing of like, oh, we'll just see each other in a few weeks. So we don't need to plan for long distance, like long term.
No.
But yeah, I think having that kind of foresight, if you do have it, planning around it and making sure you consider everyone's well-being is a really good way to just kind of get around any potential issues that could come up.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the long distance part to start with, in terms of what do you think kind of stood out for you for the ways that made the long distance work for us? What kind of things do you think come to mind for you?
I think there's a few things that jump straight to mind. I think the first one is just that really consistent communication.
Yeah.
I think that's one that really helped at least me, but I know both of us through, as we spoke pretty much every day. I think we called for at least like 2 hours, 3 hours or something.
Yeah, we video called every evening, didn't we?
Yeah, because I think we both obviously had work on, well, it was university at the time, but still had a lot of stuff to be getting on with during the day. So as soon as we kind of had dinner or finished or whatever, it was just pretty much calling each other.
Mm.
And around that, in those calls, it was trying to make them fun and interesting, and some of them more like actual like dates you go on, some of them just more kind of casual time together. It wasn't just kind of sitting there staring at each other and talking all the time, because I think that would be hard for any couple really.
Yeah.
But yeah, just having fun, like movie nights and then watching things together. And again, yeah, sometimes having those conversations, and a lot of the times we did, especially towards the beginning, just to get to know each other even better. But I think just trying to keep things interesting and keep that spark going when it's long distance is very different in a lot of ways, but it's really just still trying to make that effort and consideration. And I think we both had times of like planning out little dates or surprises or things we wanted to do with each other and things like that.
Yeah, I remember some really cute evenings of. I remember having like a really, you know, the really Echo Falls type cheap bottle of wine that you get, and I think especially because our situations were a little bit different in that I was in my, I mean, we're both in our childhood homes, but I was squished in a box room between my sister and my mum. So,
Yeah.
and I was working in that room. It was a really small room. So it was a tricky space to kind of do, but I do think we made the most of it. In terms of, yeah, kind of having those, like, I think I introduced you to the world of Marvel movies.
Yeah, I think I'd only seen one or two before then. I think I'd seen like Iron Man and then Endgame, so I'd got the beginning and the end,
Yeah.
and nothing in the middle. So
And I'm a big Marvel fan, so I knew that you had to be educated. So no regrets on that part.
no.
I think one of the favorite kind of date ideas that I thought of is an experiment, and I am going to nerd out a little bit about this because I have studied psychology. I'm a psychology nerd, but it's this experiment which is I think it's like 36 questions to make strangers fall in love. And basically it is, I mean, it's one of those, says what it is on the tin, really.
Yeah.
It's a list of questions that kind of get quite deep. I mean, some of them are pretty like relaxed, like, oh, if you could have a dinner date with anyone alive or dead, who would it be? Which I suppose you could make deep, and I think we did. But, you know, there were some like kind of general questions, and then there would be really deep, like, what was your darkest time? When have you struggled? And these questions are particularly chosen in order to put that kind of process of the getting to know each other and seeing the person through the kind of exterior through a series of questions. And I remember we did it across a couple nights, I think, 'cause obviously it was quite a lot of questions. And as you can tell from our podcast, we do like a little tangent and we do like to chat. So it took us quite a while to get through those 36 questions. And there's a secondary part as well, which you're supposed to stare in each other's eyes, like have eye contact for 4 minutes straight, which obviously we tried to do, I think, on the video, but
It's not quite the same if you're not in person for that one
No.
specifically, I don't think.
I think we have done it since.
Yeah.
But no, these questions, I think that was a really fun date. And it's such a good, I think it's the great thing about the experiment is that it doesn't just work for like a romantic relationship, but if you wanted to like deepen your connection with someone, or you wanted to full on experiment with a stranger, it allows you to do that. Like I do think the wording of fall in love is a little bit misleading in terms of it's not just about romantic love, it's just about a kind of deepened connection, respect, and understanding of one another. And I love it. If I could pull that 36 questions out on every single person, then I absolutely would, because it's just so good.
Just run around with a little scroll.
Yeah.
Open it up every time you meet someone new.
Hear thee.
Answer my riddles 36, and then we shall be friends.
Well, don't forget the eye contact.
That's true.
The
yeah,
worst part, honestly.
Stare at them the whole time.
Yeah. But yeah, I do feel like that was one of my like highlights, I think, of when we were apart. Even though, you know, a lot of the answers by that point we kind of already knew because we'd discussed them already. Because again, I think the way we work, obviously we both have quite a strong like openness, but I do think that because of how my brain works in terms of I really love asking random deep questions to people. Like I love getting to know people's history, people's like memories and things like that. So I have kind of a way of making people open up and talk about different things. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, I definitely think it is, because I'm not very good at that. I think I'm always quite more surface level, I think, with questions and conversations with especially people I've just met. But I just especially remember with like my parents or something, for example, every time, like, or the first time you meet them, you would be asking them quite different questions from what I'd be asking your parents, I think. Like mine were just much more like, oh, what do you do? And kind of things like that. But yours were more deep from the beginning. I can't think of a good example right now, but I know they were just different. And I think that was one thing that really jumped out at me. Again, jumping ahead a bit of in person, but just to speak to who you are, I think that's a good example.
Oh, so romantic. Yeah, I just think of random questions. I mean, sometimes they're really like classic Freudian, like, so what was your childhood like? What's your relationship to your mother? You know, some of them do get a little bit like they are just full on. But I think like there's an example I think that comes to mind recently when I was talking to your dad, and I just asked him about why he likes trains so much. And he came out with this beautiful story about his childhood and his memories of being with his brother and like watching the trains and getting covered in smoke and things like that. And I suppose that's kind of one of those examples of what you're talking about, I'd say.
Yeah, that's kind of a perfect example, really. I think you're just very good at kind of thinking of those and really getting people to open up who might not be as open with everyone, I think, which is just a very cool thing about you, I think.
Thank you. There is one more thing I think I'd like to discuss about what helped us when we were apart, like distance-wise, and that is the playlist.
Yes, the playlist, the first of many. But yes, one of the things that I can't remember who suggested it now.
I don't know.
We'll say both of us. We'll
Yeah,
both take credit for it.
collaborative effort.
But one of the ways that I think both of us kind of express ourselves emotionally is through music and what we listen to. And one of us initially, or both of us, thought it was a good idea to create a joined playlist on Spotify where we could both add our songs that we were really enjoying like at the moment, and were just some long time favorites and ones that we thought the other person would enjoy. And I remember quite a lot like going on the one legally mandated walk a day you were allowed back then, and listening to that playlist and just feeling even more connected to you just by listening to the songs you kind of chosen and the music you would kind of showing me, as I felt like that's kind of another intimate way to get to know someone, is the music they like and also what they're willing to show you, because I think there's always like safer picks of music that anyone would like, but I think we both put some quite more unique stuff on there that not everyone would necessarily like.
Yeah, I do think that music has this kind of way of connecting one another across, and I do find it quite funny because our tastes were quite different at the time. They still kind of are, but you were like drum and bass, dance, electronic. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, well, I think I was less like more of the intense electronic side then than I am now, and I didn't really add too much of that stuff into that playlist.
Meanwhile, I am an acoustic, folky, pop, like soft pop type music. So
Yeah.
it's, and to this day, our Spotify is an absolute mess because we still have a shared one. And I think it's got so much different music tastes on
Yeah,
it.
the Spotify Wrapped are always very unique. It's like your top 5 artists are like 3 big drum and bass ones, and then just like an acoustic one just to spice things up in the middle as well.
Yeah. Yeah, but I do think that that playlist was so special because just as you were saying about um, walking around on our mandated walks and listening to the music, I was doing just the same. And for me, which I'll probably talk about in another episode, where I go for walks when I was living in Milton Keynes is very much my kind of church. It's like my spiritual place. And it's where like I grew up really, you know, I'd had so many major and small decisions made in that space. So falling in love with you, like walking around those woods and looking forward to calling and talking about our experiences and things was so, so special. And I do think that I think everybody has a creative side, and I do think when you utilize that to support your relationships or support, you know, key parts of your life, I think that's so important and powerful because music is such a key part of our lives together. So by creating that playlist, we brought that into our relationship in a way that words wouldn't necessarily express. And it doesn't need to be music. There's so many different like creative outlets you could choose to go down, you know, from creating actual pieces of art to like crafty things, games, creating things like this, like content for one another.
Yeah,
And
exactly. And there's so many different routes you can go down. I think ours just kind of tended to operate a lot around music as a way. But again, like you say, we've got other ways of like writing letters to each other. Is another thing we did
oh yeah.
during that period of time as well. So I was thinking like poems and things like that are another way. Not that I'm any good at that stuff, but I'm sure many people are. So I think just expressing that kind of love and the emotions you have for one another in different kind of ways is another really intimate way to get to know one another and express how you feel.
Yeah, I do feel like we've kind of painted this picture now of a kind of idealistic
That's true.
long distance relationship. And of course, you know, we are approaching 5 years, so we
Something went
do,
well.
yeah, what I mean is we do look back at it more fondly and we kind of forget those tougher times and more difficult situations. But there was a lot that was stirred up and it wasn't easy to prioritize our relationship and even explain our relationship to other people in our lives. I mean, my family are pretty kind of relaxed. I think yours are as well, to be fair.
Yeah.
My sister was so like, oh, you're going to go call your boyfriend. And I was like, oh, he's not my boyfriend yet.
Give it 5 days.
I know, literally.
But
But it wasn't easy. I do remember there being times when I was crying on the phone and just wanting it to end, and the fear and my anxiety went through the roof during that time.
yeah.
I mean, we could do a whole episode on our experiences of lockdown. Everyone has a story with it, don't they?
Yeah, I think that is a good shout. I guess it's slightly disconnected from what we're talking about today, but it
Yeah.
is worth mentioning because it's like, it's not like it was a breezy 9 months the entire time. There was a
No.
lot of moments where it's hardships with either our families or our friends, or just general stress and anxiety and worry about the world as a whole, because it wasn't an easy time to
Yeah.
live through.
And not knowing as well, that's the trickiest thing about being long distance in, and it wouldn't necessarily be the case of people just long distance in lockdown, but people that are, have actual lives in different countries. I do feel like there's this shared understanding that, or experience, not understanding, but experience of not knowing when it's going to change, like how permanent it is.
Yeah.
And you just don't see the end. And it just kept coming and coming. And our time apart just kept growing. And it was really difficult. But I think, yeah, we did make the most of it, and in a multitude of ways, but it certainly wasn't easy breezy. We had to expose ourselves. We had to be vulnerable with one another, which is never a comfortable place to be.
No, especially not with someone. Again, it's like, not to undermine the initial connection we had, but it is still someone that you only met a very short while ago, especially to
Yeah.
begin with, and being that open and that vulnerable is scary.
Yeah.
Even when you're like 99% confident that this person is perfect for you, it's just like there's still any little doubts or kind of worries that are there aren't just going to be going away immediately.
No, I remember when I saw you again and being like taken aback by how bloody tall you were. Because like I knew you were tall, but obviously when you're on a camera, you
Yeah,
don't
height
you
isn't
don't
really a factor as much.
Yeah. And you got braces as well, didn't you? For
God,
like
yeah,
the
I
millionth
did.
time in your life, and I was like, oh God, he looks like a child. I'm dating a child.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, it is worth mentioning that. I guess it kind of transitions fairly nicely into when we met up and potentially started living together, unless there was anything else you wanted to mention about the long distance, because I feel like we've kind of covered a lot of that, really.
Yeah, I do think we have, but of course, if there's anyone that kind of wants us to expand more or have any questions about that chapter, of course, we were very fortunate in that it was short term for us. I know
Yeah,
there's many people that are in relationships that are long distance across countries in complete different time zone for years. We only had a snippet of that, but that's just kind of sharing our experiences, what we're here to do anyway. But yeah, I do feel ready to share a bit about how we moved on towards sharing a bedroom together.
yes. I think that was the next big step of our relationship. So as we mentioned, we had a few kind of shorter periods of time here and there in that long distance where we did meet up, but I think it really felt like we were entering a new chapter when we moved back into Nottingham in a room in a shared house, essentially, for what, it was about 5 or 6 months, really. I think we were there for
It was student housing, wasn't it?
student housing. Yeah,
So
it was worth saying that.
we were in like a house of uni students, and we didn't really connect much with the people we were living with, really, did we? So we kind of,
No,
I think everyone was going for a weird time. And so it does feel like we were working, eating, sleeping, doing everything in a literal bedroom. Like we went from being not in the same city to sharing the same four walls.
basically all the time. I think the only time we had on the average day that was apart was when one of us went to like make food or get a drink or something from the upstairs.
Literally.
Um, and that was pretty much it. So the rest of the time, again, like we shared the bed, the desk, literally everything in those four walls.
Yeah, we were like jailed up together, weren't we?
Well, it gives a certain connotation to it.
Well, I mean,
But no,
you could. I mean, There are certain aspects, because like even our food shopping, we didn't go food shopping, we got it delivered.
Yeah.
And we were still in, because another round, it was almost like the second wave, I would say, of the thing. So neither of us could go home. We could do our daily walks, but where we were living, it wasn't really feasible. There wasn't anywhere that was like well socially distant, spaced out. There was that, like, we did go for little walks, and it wasn't long before we started the community garden project, my first community garden project, which began a whole journey for me. But most of the time, majority of the time, we were literally in a bedroom with no escape.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of surmising it. And do you want to talk about positives first from that experience?
Well, I was just going to ask you about like your general, like what stood out to you about that, kind of what felt the most like different about that, I suppose, but we could go whatever.
I think, yeah, no, it's a good point to start. I guess the main difference is when we were apart, like fully distanced from each other, it kind of limited the time you had together in a day. So when you were calling or having that time together, whatever shape that took, you really wanted to make the most of it. So
Yeah.
I think it is that thing of when you know you're only going to have 2 hours out of a full day with someone, you want to make the effort to make that feel special.
Mm.
Whereas when you're with someone basically 24/7 in the same space, like not even in like a separate room or whatever, it feels like the opposite. So it felt like it really has to be more of a conscious effort to kind of still have conversations and still kind of make the effort to have nice times together and things like that, rather than it felt like more natural before, because it's like, oh well, this is the 2 hours that we have together, so
Yeah.
really want to make the most of it. And also actually planning any of that stuff, if you want it to be a surprise or a secret or whatever, was also very hard, given the fact that,
No secrets.
again, yeah, you're in the same room, so the only thing you could do is anything silently on a laptop or a phone while it's faced away from the other person. So it's really not like you could organize anything that elaborate. I mean, again, it was still kind of lockdown time anyway, so you couldn't do anything super fancy. But yeah, I think those were the main things that kind of stood out to me initially. What would you say yours are?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. Like, there were definitely quite big patches of time where we got so into the routine of things and were literally just in survival mode, really, that
Mm.
everything else kind of got dropped. So all like the romance and cutesy dating kind of stopped. But what I was going to kind of say is that I feel it was like learning a new person all over again, because yes, we'd had every conversation under the sun by that point with the long distance, but we hadn't lived together. We hadn't really even shared, what if you had been like a true person who chews really loudly, like those, the practical like
Yeah,
life
true.
things I didn't know anything about. And if you'd snored, or just our general like living personalities, or just I mean, I feel everyone will agree that when you live with someone, you obviously spend more time with them, and often you can kind of end up getting into like not necessarily big fights, but like what they call tiffs, like kind
Tiffs,
of
yeah, I think
little
that's a good.
bickering
Yeah.
little things, because you're learning how to share a space. And that was, again, just talking about how I said at the beginning, how everything was so extreme. This was so extreme as well, is because there was no privacy. There was no, if we were annoyed at each other or we needed space, we couldn't get it. It would be like a child going into the naughty corner, would be all we
Basically,
could
yeah.
do.
Yeah, just put your headphones on and sit in the corner and look at the wall and
We had,
zone out.
yeah, we had to just learn how to not go mad, living in this tiny, well, it was quite a decent sized room, to be fair.
But
Um,
yeah, for two people living there full time, it made it feel smaller. I think for one
yeah,
person, it would be quite a big room, but
literally. So I think that came with its own host of challenges, and to some degree, it might have been kind of even more difficult than the time when we were long distance, because at least when we were long distance, we were in familiar territory and we had focus and direction. And although obviously when we were kind of moving into that room, we did both have our degrees to focus on, that was it though. Like, I do think I think we both might have struggled more sharing that space, but at the same time, because we'd had so much time apart, it also made us appreciative of the time that we did have together. And we also had a whole list of ways to do little dates at home because we'd been doing them for months.
Yeah, there was just kind of a long backlog of dates we could do again, but they'd be in person this time, which did make them feel kind of new. But I do also agree on the point of if we'd had to, for whatever reason, move into that space initially together, I do feel like it would have been much harder than having that time apart to begin with and then moving in together. Because I think, like you were kind of saying with that time apart, if there was any reason we got annoyed or needed a bit of space or whatever, it's very easy to have it when you're long distance because you just kind of not stop communicating outright, but you just kind of take that time for yourself that you'd usually have anyway, but you can just kind of give that more to yourself and that focus. Whereas when you're sharing that room, it is kind of impossible unless you go for like a walk or something. But even then, it's a fairly short amount of time compared to what you could have if you're like living in a space bigger than one room.
Yeah. So we don't have like much time left, so I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about our what we found beneficial, like what kind of helped us, or what did we learn from that period of time when we were sharing a little bedroom.
I think the first thing for me is, again, it's kind of similar to what I said for long distance, really, but just communicating and being honest with each other about how you're feeling at any point was really important. I think there were times where I could, like, one of us could kind of sense the other might be annoyed or something, but
You sensing me being annoyed.
I didn't want to say that. But I wouldn't always have an idea of why exactly that was. And it's not like I was just being clueless or anything. I think sometimes it just helps to know if you're doing something that is annoying the other person, how you can kind of go about fixing it. So having that communication is important.
I do feel like I'm going to challenge you on that
Okay.
because I do feel there was quite a learning curve that I think to some degree we're still figuring out, of knowing like the reasons behind being annoyed and stuff. And I do think I was going to say that as one of our biggest challenges, because I remember that, and it did kind of happen more like in the long distance or those trips that we kind of spoke about where we did see each other. But I remember there being so many points where like our anxieties spiked because we obviously both have experiences of
Yeah,
anxiety,
that's true.
and but in very different ways. And that was a huge learning curve that I think we kind of have the anxiety understood now, but there are still certainly times when one of our mood dips and we can't necessarily figure out why, and the person who's in that dip might not be capable of communicating it at that given time. Like I think now we're quite good at being like reflective and being like, oh, so this is what was bothering me at the time. And again, we are better at kind of predicting or trying to figure out at least part of what the person needs or what's going on. But I do think when we were in that room, we didn't necessarily.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. I think for me especially, it's like I kind of process my emotions after the fact to a certain extent if I am annoyed, and that's usually time that I'd have to myself to kind of do that. So
Yeah.
again, having that space where you're constantly together, it becomes a little bit harder to do it that way round. Like you kind of need to understand a bit about how you're feeling and why you're feeling that way as it's happening,
Yeah.
which is definitely something that I was kind of had to learn as well. And again, it's what I was saying, it's not just putting it all on one of us or anything. I think it's just both of us were on either side of it fairly equally, I'd say.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was basically finished.
I felt you were circling a little bit.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think one of the things that did help us with that situation is literally just doing that, is allowing each other to have time to. I think we used a lot of distractive techniques, didn't we? I think I remember if like one of us was in a bad mood, we just put something on. Like I feel like we watched a lot of Netflix, and really, I just remember us having. Did we even have a TV? I swear we watched everything on the.
Everything was on a laptop pretty much.
No, I think did we have a TV?
We had
Yeah,
a
we had a little TV.
Oh, we had a well, what is one of my work monitors now was our
Yeah.
TV. Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. So that was kind of set up as opposite our bed, which we turned into a sofa mode during the day by kind of putting some pillows on the back of it against the wall and sitting on it the other way around, that you'd lie on it to go to sleep. So that was our way of kind of converting the room between sleep and daytime modes.
Yeah, we did have that's the thing. I think what we did do well, I would say, for managing that situation is I remember us going, like, I think we went to like B&M and we brought some items to make it a shared cozy space
Yeah.
that was both of ours, because I remember for the first time when we were in that room, I felt that it was very much your room and I was just staying there, because we didn't have I didn't have most of my things at this point. My stuff was all in storage because my parents were moving out of my childhood home, so I didn't even have a home to go back to at that point. So all of my stuff was in boxes. So we brought some items that were ours, and we tried to have those kind of transitional rooms, almost as if it was like a room in a set where we would change the room to whatever we were doing. So when we were working, we would set the desk up and we would both work at the desk. When it was time to finish work and put the laptops down, we would make the bed into a sofa and put the TV on. And then when we would sleep, we would obviously make it a really calming environment and things like that. So I think I'm such a believer in your environment is such a powerful thing that can affect you, and it can so inspire your moods, that was quite a key point of how we could cope, I think, was just using that space. And I think when we picked up like the community garden project, that allowed us another kind of escapism almost. So when restrictions started easing up just a little bit and we could do things, I think it did take the pressure off a little bit. And like you were saying, in terms of our communication was so solid at that point already, we were just having to learn how to communicate about just the life living together stuff. But in terms of the emotional side, we'd laid a lot of groundwork, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. And I think especially just kind of making the room evolve around the day. It was trying to create like a house within a room rather than just living in that one room.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of most of what I was going to say, to be fair, about like what we think went well with it. Because I think it was that, and then also just letting each other kind of focus, and also kind of supporting each other and bringing each other up in terms of our working at uni at the time. Because I feel like it would be easy during all of that kind of chaos and living in that one room to just kind of get more like kind of down long term and lose focus on what we're really trying to do at that time. And I feel
Yeah.
like we managed to support each other and both kind of succeed really well at what we were doing in that period of our lives as well.
Definitely. I think that's a pretty good place to leave it, to be honest. I
Mm-hmm.
do feel like we've kind of spoke about it. But as always, if there are any questions or comments or anything you'd want us to kind of go into a bit more, then do just let us know. You can contact us via Wellbeing in Nature, which is on Instagram and Facebook. We also have a website, wellbeinginnature.org. And we also have a podcast email address now, don't we? So
We do. It's partners.in.progress.19 @gmail.com. Many dots in it.
all the dots.
Exactly. But yeah, that's all set up for any other questions or inquiries around anything. And then we can discuss them further as and when they come in, really.
Or if there's any topic ideas or things you'd like us to talk about, then do let us know as well. But yeah, before we close off completely, we're going to end with our usual last minute segment of what is something you are proud of having done for your well-being in the last week.
So in this last week, I started back up at work again. I think I
2
mentioned
days.
that in the last project. Yeah, a whole 2 days, busy times. But one thing that I'm really proud of I've done for my well-being this week is we've spent a lot of today, being a Sunday, kind of sorting out and really making our main living space in our house feel a lot nicer, and just really reorganizing it. So we're taking down the Christmas tree, got all the gifts sorted out, just really made it nice and cozy again and feel it more wintry than Christmassy, I think.
Yeah.
And that's just a really big step to kind of make the house evolve with us into the next season.
Well, still the same season, but
Well,
next part of the season.
Same season, next part. Yeah, I always forget
Sorry.
when. I always think spring starts as soon as the year starts, and then I realise we're only like a
No.
week into winter, and we've still got most of the months left.
Yeah, you did completely just steal mine though. Thank you
And
for
you're
that.
welcome. No, you
Um,
could add anything to it.
I do feel, yeah, I mean, I've had a really nice week because I had my mum visit for my birthday and we had a really, really nice time and it was so special and I just love spending time with her. Um, but I was going to say, just because I think we're literally looking around our living room right now, aren't we? And it's
Mm.
all tidy and calm and the candles burning and oh, it's just so nice and lovely and calm in here when it's been really cluttered since before Christmas, really. And yeah, so as you were saying, today is Sunday and we have a thing called Reset Sundays. If you've come from Instagram, you already know what this is. But I do feel like we could use this as a topic for next week. I think might be a really good
Yeah.
thing to do because I absolutely love our Reset Sundays. And we have been a bit neglectful of the Reset Sundays, but we're really trying to get back into it. So I'm really proud of. We went a bit above and beyond today. I think we've still got a few little bits to do today, haven't we?
Yeah.
But I think especially, I mean, obviously, as you're listening to this, we've already had a podcast episode out. It's been a week, but we launched the first episode today, and so it's been a really lovely like reset button kind of pressed today, which is amazing. So before we do head off, what is one thing you are going to do or anything that you need from me for your well-being in the next week?
I think it's leading up to my birthday now, so I think
Yes.
that's the main thing that I'm kind of thinking about. I guess it's just support on planning and sorting all the stuff out for my birthday, because I'll be doing that around work because I'll be working the full 5 days next week.
The
So
audacity.
I know, but yeah, I'll be getting back into that kind of traditional 9 to 5 routine as well. So it's just around that, making time to plan out my birthday and kind of make sure that there's time to feel celebrated as that comes around.
As you deserve to.
Thank you very much. But yeah, I guess the same question back at you from me.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to repeat because last week I said that I was going to start getting back into my regular activities that I do for my health and well-being.
Mhm.
And I think we spoke a bit about it being like my journaling, meditation, yoga, all those little bits, going for walks and stuff. I think we probably will go for a walk this evening.
Yeah.
But I didn't do too much. I mean, I didn't progress very much with that last week, which is totally okay because life happens. The intention was there, and I do feel like quite proud of the week that we've had. But I do feel I want to um, actually now that I'm going back to work this week as well. So I've got 3 sessions this week. So we're kind of going properly into back to routine. I mean, we've got your parents coming at the end of the week, haven't we? And your nan.
Yeah.
So it'll be a busier weekend, but I'm going to try and pick up some of my habits during this week, and just keep being in my little hibernation winter era. So that's my intention and plan for my well-being this week.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Can definitely support you on those steps as much as I can as well.
Yeah. All right, we will continue on with our Reset Sundays and leave you to do your own Reset Sundays, hopefully. And we will be back next week with another topic. So have a lovely week, and we will see you next time.
Bye bye.